ever been listening to a speech and about halfway through it you realize that the speaker wasn't really talking about what you thought he or she was talking about? Well, I'm sure that happens to all of us. And I think that when that happens, it is the result of a poor introduction to your speech. You know that you're supposed to have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Well, the introduction, there are certain things that an introduction is supposed to do. Okay, we've gotten off to a pretty good start. I tried to get your attention with a rhetorical question, and Callie, the cat, tried to get your attention with a meow. I've worked with students for quite a while on preparing and delivering speeches, and particularly with the introductions. And so the rest of the time today, I'd like to share with you some ideas about strategies that work pretty well in accomplishing the goals of the introduction. So let's look at some of those that maybe will be helpful to you. Okay, I've got several strategies that have worked pretty well in my little basket over here. But before I start talking about these strategies, I want to just mention one thing that I think you should avoid, and that is mentioning how much preparation you've done. Some people think, well, I need to tell them that I just didn't have time to prepare this. No, you really don't. Just don't talk about how much preparation you've done. Let the speech stand for itself. The first strategy that I'm going to talk about is the one that I use to introduce this session, and it is the rhetorical question. The rhetorical question is designed to get you thinking about the topic and about the ideas that are going to be presented. In my case, I wanted you to think about what happens when an introduction is not done well. So that's one of them that can be used with a lot of different things. It's like any other strategy. It's not always helpful, but it can be. You can also use a real question to get audience participation. You might ask them a question, ask them to raise their hands, ask them to stand up, and you mean to find out what it is, and that draws them in and gets them to thinking about what you're going to talk about. Another strategy here that often works well is the story or anecdote that goes along with your speech. It might be something that happened to you that's very personal, and it might establish some credibility for you because you've had that experience. So there's all kinds of reasons. You might also use a story that you have read somewhere that fits in well with your speech. So always think about, is there some experience or anecdote that might help to establish your purpose? The next thing I'm pulling out of my basket here is using quotations. This is one of my favorites. Very often, you may have a favorite author or a favorite speaker or a favorite famous person who has the same view on something that you do. For example, if I were going to talk about something about the environment, I'd probably look up Wendell Berry because he's one of my favorite authors and see if he had said something similar to what I'm trying to say. If you have a favorite person like that, then you may be able to do that. If not, you can always Google quotes and find all these collections of quotes which are arranged by subject. So you may find somebody that will give a little more authority or credibility to what you're trying to say. So that's another good thing. The next thing I'm pulling out here is a startling statement. And this may be a fact that would kind of shock your audience. If you're talking about some kind of, say, car accidents or some disease or something, and maybe that particular disease kills more people every year than were killed in a certain war or something like that. So there's all kinds of statements that you can get from statistics that might help to establish the credibility of what you're trying to say. So that's another thing to look at, is quotes. Another thing that is often helpful to use is references to the occasion. If you're maybe celebrating some particular thing, maybe you can refer to that and tie that in with what you're trying to say, if it's appropriate. And kind of going along with that would also be the idea of referencing a historical statement or a historical event of some kind. So always think about the possibilities. You know, you may be speaking on a holiday and you're hardly even aware of it, but it might tie in well with what you're trying to say. So think about historical events that might tie in. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is demonstrations. Now, obviously, you can't do a demonstration with every speech you give, but think about that as a possibility, because some people do or are able to use some kind of demonstration to start their speech off. So these are just some of the strategies that have worked for me or have worked for students that I've coached. So think about these as possibilities when creating a good introduction. I think that these may be helpful.